My name is Sun-Young Choi, and today, the doctors who once used my silence as a shield for their lies are learning that the truth doesn't just come out. It strikes with the force of a tidal wave. They looked at my uniform, my quiet focus, and my status as an immigrant, and assumed I was a girl who would submissively accept a ruined career to protect a wealthy donor's fragile ego. They thought that in the sterile, high-pressure halls of a Chicago ICU, a nurse's word is worth nothing against a billionaire's checkbook and a hospital board's greed. But they forgot that the walls of a hospital hear every whisper, every heartbeat, and every lie. In this city, the man who owns the silence is the man who owns the power, and they never suspected that the man sitting in the shadows of Ward 4 had already decided I was under his personal protection. I moved to Chicago from Seoul with a singular, driving goal: to save lives in the most critical, high-stakes moments a human being can face. I became an ICU nurse at St. Jude's, a premier medical institution where the technology is cutting edge, but the internal politics are as ancient and brutal as a gladiatorial arena. I spent my nights in the rhythmic glow of monitors, tracking the delicate ebb and flow of life and holding the hands of the dying when their families couldn't be there. I was a professional, meticulous, observant, and unwavering. I followed every protocol to the letter, knowing that in my world, a single milliliter of the wrong medicine or one missed beat on a monitor is the difference between life and death. But I soon learned that in a place where money talks, even the most perfect medical record can be erased if the right person asks for a sacrifice. The crisis began with Mr. Sterling, a billionaire real estate mogul who treated the hospital like his private five-star hotel. He had been admitted for a delicate post-surgical recovery and was under strict, non-negotiable orders not to leave his bed. I told him repeatedly that his blood pressure was dangerously unstable and that his internal sutures were still at risk. But he was a man who hated being told no by anyone, especially a woman in scrubs, who spoke with a soft Korean lilt. Against my direct, documented medical advice, he insisted on standing up to take a private business call, shouting that his time was worth more than the entire hospital staff's lives combined. I tried to assist him, to guide him back to the safety of the bed, but he shoved me aside with a sneer, shouting that he didn't need a clumsy girl telling him how to move his own body. Seconds later, the monitors wailed. His blood pressure bottomed out. He collapsed heavily, hitting his head on the bedside table and triggering a massive, life-threatening internal bleed. I stayed calm, I called the code, and I saved his life for the second time that week. But the gratitude I expected never came. Instead, I found myself in the middle of a political nightmare. The aftermath was a whirlwind of panic and blame-shifting. Instead of admitting that the billionaire had ignored every medical order, his powerful family and the hospital's senior administration needed a scapegoat to keep their reputation and their funding intact. The chief of surgery, Dr. Aris, a man who cared more about his golf handicap than his patients, stood in the middle of the crowded nurses' station the next morning. He made sure everyone was watching, from the junior interns to the head of the department. "Nurse Choi, your negligence caused a high-profile patient to suffer a catastrophic fall," he shouted, his voice booming off the glass partitions like a hammer. "You failed to secure him. You failed to follow the care plan I personally drafted. To protect the integrity of this institution and the safety of our patients, you are suspended pending a full termination hearing. We cannot have nurses who are this reckless and incompetent in our ICU." I stood there, my hands clasped tightly at my waist, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew the truth. The patient's bedside monitors had logged his sudden, unassisted movement, and the room's internal electronic log showed my repeated warnings and his refusal to comply. But Dr. Aris looked at me with a cold, dismissive smirk, knowing that the Sterling family was threatening to pull a $50 million research grant if the hospital didn't provide a head to roll. The other doctors, men I had worked beside for years, looked at the floor. They knew I was right, but they valued their research funding more than my career or the truth. I was escorted out of the ward like a common criminal, my badge stripped from my neck and my locker emptied, leaving me with nothing but the stinging, bitter memory of their cowardice. Have you ever been the one to follow every rule to the letter, only to be publicly blamed when someone more powerful than you broke them? Tell me in the comments how you handled the betrayal of people who were supposed to be your mentors. Watching this entire scene from the darkened doorway of the VIP suite across the hall was Elijah Brooks. To the city of Chicago, Elijah is a philanthropist and a titan of private logistics, a man with a sharp mind and a presence that demands silence. But to the streets, he is a ghost who controls the flow of everything that matters. He is an American mafia boss with a reputation for a cold, calculated sense of justice that bypasses the slow machinery of the law. His mother was in the bed next to Mr. Sterling's suite, and I had been her primary nurse for 3 weeks. I had cared for her with a tenderness and a cultural respect that Elijah had never seen in a professional setting. He had been sitting in the dark of his mother's room for nights, watching the way I worked, and he had heard every word Mr. Sterling had shouted before the fall. He knew the truth before I even had to speak it. Elijah didn't step out to argue with Dr. Aris in the hallway. He is not a man who wastes his breath on people he has already decided to destroy. He is a man who deals in facts, leverage, and absolute outcomes.
Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more revenge and love stories. Turn on the bell notification to stay updated.
As I was being led away by security, his eyes met mine for a brief, electric second. A dark, steady gaze that felt like a promise of something I couldn't yet name. That night, while I sat in my small dark apartment staring at my nursing license and wondering if my life was over, Elijah was at work. He didn't use guns or muscle. He used his connections to the hospital's deep-level IT department. He gathered the raw, unedited electronic logs that Dr. Aris had already tried to delete from the main server. He pulled the high-definition security footage from the hallway that showed Mr. Sterling aggressively pushing me away. He even secured signed, notarized statements from the overnight orderlies who had seen the fall but had been threatened into silence by the administration. 48 hours later, the hospital board was called to an emergency, closed-door meeting. They expected to sign my final termination papers, issue a press release blaming me, and move on with their lives. Instead, they walked into the boardroom to find Elijah Brooks sitting at the head of the conference table, his very presence turning the air in the room to ice. Beside him was a stack of folders and a laptop ready to play the reality of their corruption for the world to see. "Gentlemen," Elijah began, his voice a calm, terrifying rumble that seemed to settle in the bones of everyone present. "I don't care about your grants, your expansion plans, or your donor's fragile ego. I care about the woman who kept my mother's heart beating while you were busy playing politics and golf. You have 2 very simple choices. You can fire Dr. Aris and the 2 senior administrators who conspired to falsify medical records, a felony that carries a significant prison sentence, and you can publicly clear Sun-Young Choi's name with a full apology. Or I can release this footage and these deleted logs to the medical board, the federal authorities, and the press. By sunset, I will ensure that every insurance contract and city permit this hospital holds is revoked. Decide now." The board members looked at Dr. Aris, whose face had turned a sickly, bruised shade of gray. They realized, in that moment, that they weren't just fighting an immigrant nurse anymore. They were fighting the man who owned the city's debt and the very ground the hospital stood on. That afternoon, I received a phone call from the hospital's legal counsel. It wasn't a termination notice. It was an urgent, almost panicked invitation to return to the hospital for an important administrative announcement. When I arrived, the main lobby was filled with staff, cameras, and attention you could cut with a scalpel. The CEO of the hospital stood at the podium, looking humbled, broken, and 10 years older than he had been on Thursday. He announced the immediate resignation of Dr. Aris and the 2 administrators for unethical conduct. He then called my name, apologizing publicly and profoundly for the grievous error, and announcing that I was being promoted to head nurse of the ICU with full back pay, a significant bonus, and a permanent, written apology in my record. I walked back into my ward that evening, my head held high, my white coat pristine, and my badge restored to my chest. As I passed Elijah's mother's room, I saw him standing there by the window, adjusting the fresh flowers I had brought for her days ago before the chaos started. He didn't ask for a thank you. He didn't even mention the board meeting or the lives he had just dismantled. He simply looked at me and gave a short, respectful nod, the nod of one professional recognizing another. The truth is a powerful thing, Sun-Young, he said softly, his voice a low anchor in the quiet room. But power is what keeps the truth from being buried by men who have none. You're back where you belong. My mother sleeps better when you're on the floor. No one will ever blame you for another man's weakness again. I've made sure of it. I realized then that in a world full of sharks and politicians, I had found a protector who lived in the deepest water of all. My name is Sun-Young Choi. I am a nurse, a witness to the fragile, beautiful line of life, and a woman who no longer has to fear the shadows or the lies of the powerful. I return to my patients, steady and calm, knowing that while I watch over the sick and the vulnerable, a very powerful man is watching over me, ensuring that my light never flickers again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more Mafia love and justice stories. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more revenge and love stories. Turn on the bell notification to stay updated.